This is not a story about forgiveness.
It's a story of revenge for real.
She ruined his life. Somebody had to pay. Somebody had to pay.
The land of Kentucky bourbon, beautiful women, and storybook Southern families with a slight touch of madness.
I literally went to bed one night with this beautiful, wonderful marriage of 10 years, and I literally wake up to a nightmare.
Her ex-husband, Steve Nunn, a Jekyll and Hyde personality who had a rising political career and then a restraining order from his newest girlfriend, Amanda Ross.
Amanda, if you can't trust him and he's hitting you, why are you with him?
He thought she destroyed his political hopes, so he plotted revenge to destroy her.
He was humiliated. He was angry. He got even.
He was all giddy like, hee, look what I've got. He was gonna buy a billboard and put one of the naked pictures of her up on a billboard.
And when revenge doesn't work...
So now we go to step 2.
She said, you know, he's going to kill me.
There's blood everywhere.
No, really, he's going to kill me.
It's like right out of a murder novel.
But murder was just for starters. Here's Chris Cuomo.
Tonight we go to a place where horse farms like this are playgrounds for people with big names and big money. Blue bloods from Kentucky, thoroughbreds in their own right, but with some ugly family secrets. Our story begins with a life of promise, leads to romance, but ends with revenge and murder. On a warm summer morning in south central Kentucky, a pastoral cemetery becomes the setting for the final act of a tragedy, one that would echo clear across the bluegrass state and beyond.
It was just unbelievable. It's the most bizarre story probably in modern Kentucky history.
Typically, we don't deal with influential people involved in homicide.
A lone figure approaches the grave of beloved former Governor Louis B. Nunn. It's the late governor's 56-year-old son, Steve, here to face the legacy he failed to live up to.
He was sore, he was mad, he was embarrassed, he was unemployed, and he was broke. He was drunk.
I was concerned about Steve maybe hurting himself.
In his mind, Steve Nunn is a victim, driven first to ruin, then madness by his former fiancée, Amanda Ross.
He had it all, and when he lost it all, he was angry.
He has driven from the scene of his revenge to his parents' final resting place. He used the word revenge.
Yes, revenge.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple.
He slits his wrists as he weeps in shame, dripping blood on the stone marking his mother's grave. At the same time, police are trying to find him, talking to his ex-wife, Tracy Damron.
We can see the writing on the wall. It's just madness.
And I said, I know in my heart he would be at his dad and mom's cemetery.
The cemetery?
The cemetery.
It's like right out of a murder novel.
Something like that.
Minutes later, law enforcement is on the scene.
About that time, they noticed Mr. Nunn kind of hiding. He had a gun in his hand.
He stands up, turns away, and raises his weapon.
It was shots that I heard, but I wasn't for sure what I was hearing.
I think Steve wanted to die. I know he did.
The Kentucky Steve Nunn knew was a world of thoroughbred horse racing, of pretty women in fancy hats, and of fine barrel-aged bourbon. Nunn had a taste for all three.
I love you all. I love the people of Kentucky.
He'd grown up in an elite insular realm of country clubs, charity events, debutante balls, a realm that Lexington radio host and society maven Sue Wiley has been observing and enjoying for decades.
The scale of entertaining was lavish is the only word. Dinner jackets and formal gowns and jewels.
Thank you, my friends.
Privilege and power seemed to be his birthright ever since his father Louis was elected governor back in 1967. As a teenager, Steve is a kind of prince, #1 son for an entire state. Lexington has its fair share of stately homes, but the governor's mansion just up the road in Frankfort dwarfs them all. What does it mean to be a nun in Kentucky?
To be a nun in Kentucky, there was power behind that name.
And we've got a message for him in Kentucky this year, and we've got one for him in Washington next year.
But it's a double-edged sword. Governor Louis Nunn, standing 6'4" and one of the most talented politicians of his era, is a larger-than-life figure in every sense of the term. Being his son is no walk in the bluegrass.
Steve wanted his father's respect, wanted his father's good opinion, wanted his father's love.
In Steve, I see someone who wanted to please his father, who wanted to follow in his father's footsteps.
Al Cross covered politics for the Louisville Courier-Journal, watching as the affable and handsome youth embraces celebrity in the shadow of his father's fame.
When you're the only son of such a powerful, successful, overwhelming kind of politician, much can be expected of you. And I think that Louis expected more from Steve than he should have.
If you were going to design your father, you would not design Louis Nunn.
Larry Forgy was Governor Nunn's budget director. While he admired his boss's political skills, he abhorred how Louis treated his adoring son.
Louis Nunn was a man of ridicule. And I think Steve Nunn, unfortunately, grew up in ridicule.
After his father leaves office, the family would eventually relocate to this rural estate. Now it is Steve's time. He attends law school and has a stint in business before, inevitably, entering politics, winning a seat as a Republican state representative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This is really a public health issue for...
Steve was almost a mirror image of his father physically. He was politically ambitious.
It's also a public...
That was the logical thing to do.
But if Steve has the desire to be his dad, it's not clear he has the requisite skill or the toughness.
He was not Louis Nunn. He was a quieter, gentler man.
Well, people would say things like, you know, he'll never be his father.
And all the while, the specter of Louis's expectations hangs over him.
And it grew as time grew. And Louis is there watching all the time.
Predictably, the legendary Governor Louis Nunn is neither amused nor impressed by the mini-me accomplishments of his son.
In their interaction, both public and private, you could tell that Steve never quite measured up in Louis's eyes, and he knew it.
There's love, and then there's conditional love. And there was a lot of conditional love in this family.
Family politics can be the ugliest politics of all.
It can.
Steve is becoming more like his father, but liking him less and less. Behind the gates of the Nunn family estate, some ugly secrets threaten to destroy an already tense relationship. In 1994, Steve's mother Beulah divorces Louis and seeks a restraining order against him. Things allegedly come to a boil in an altercation, with Steve intervening to protect her.
Steve thought she was going to be physically abused by his father during a family argument, and apparently he attacked the governor, and it did rupture their relationship.
It ended here, in a handwritten letter with the now elderly former governor saying he would not tolerate any further physical abuse. For years, the father and son wouldn't speak. The Nunns are a political dynasty disintegrating as the seeds of tragedy take root. What happens next will shock everyone.
People were stunned. It's a stunt.
Good breeding. In horse racing, the proper pedigree can make all the difference between win, place, and show. And the same goes with politics. So in 1996, when a Kentucky thoroughbred like Steve Nunn marries the young filly Tracy Damron, the daughter of a coal mining magnate, it seems like a perfect pairing of superior bloodlines. How was the marriage?
The marriage was wonderful, and I truly know that I experienced the best of Steve Nunn. And I know that.
For a time, the whole world is their dance floor.
And he would always tell me, you know, enjoy this moment. Life is so fleeting.
And I've got Tracy with me, my wife, and she's great. She is a special woman for all of Kentucky and for all of the world.
What was the future for Steve Nunn?
The future was bright.
Motivated perhaps by his own experience, Steve Nunn finds his signature cause, protecting victims of domestic abuse. He co-sponsors legislation that would have an ironic echo years later. Bill 455 makes it a death penalty offense when a person named in a domestic violence order murders the protected individual.
This is going to touch a tremendous number of families throughout the Commonwealth.
But Tracy knew that all was not well with Steve. For years, the estrangement between her husband and his larger-than-life father had been left to fester.
He made his own way, but yes, he was still Louis Nunn's son, and he knew that. You know, he had a torch to bear, if you will, because it was public.
Finally, in 2002, Tracy manages what should have been the final piece in the puzzle for her husband's success: a reconciliation between father and son.
And they were literally hugging and kissing and telling each other every day that they loved each other. And I remember sitting back and watching it and saying, I have witnessed a miracle from God. I mean, this is a miracle.
Back by his father's side, Steve is ready to take the biggest gamble of his career, a run for governor in the Republican primary.
I'm proud to work for the values and the ideals of the Republican Party for the benefit of all Kentuckians. And I ask you to support Steve Nunn.
His father's endorsement is critical.
Steve Nunn has been pressing the flesh on the campaign trail with his father.
But if Nunn's gubernatorial campaign is intended to highlight the newly warm and fuzzy bond between father and son, it ends up only emphasizing the stark difference between them. As a debater, Nunn looks out of his league.
The decision related to Hunter Bates. And
the race that he ran for governor was ill-fated and it was ill-advised.
I don't think the public thought he had much of a chance of becoming governor.
I've been a farmer here in western Kentucky. For 8 years, I've grown tobacco, milked cows.
Steve Nunn loses the primary, badly.
And I congratulate the victors.
The loss is a bitter disappointment.
My dad, Louis Nunn, who has stood with me, and I'm so proud of him.
And after one final Christmas together, an even greater loss. He would lose his father.
Yes.
His family is still dealing with his sudden death.
We're struggling, quite frankly, because it was so sudden. But
and what would it mean?
Steve's whole identity as a human being was, I'm Louis Nunn's son. And when that was gone, who are you? Who is Steve? Who is he?
Louis Nunn is buried under an epitaph of his achievements. He leaves Steve $650,000 and one major league identity crisis. He starts to change in some small, some not so small ways. What do you see?
I see Steve actually becoming his dad, either consciously or unconsciously. Started wearing his dad's clothes, his shoes, telling people he was Louis B. Nunn. He absorbed that spirit, if you will, of his dad.
And that wasn't the only spirit Steve was absorbing, and in large quantities.
Pure old, unadulterated Kentucky whiskey. It's all factory. Smell it. It was sad. You knew he ought to quit. You knew he was too much and too many times.
Too much, too many times. That becomes a running theme, and not just with drinking. Turns out Steve has inherited something else from his father.
The middle of the 20th century, it was presumed that men in public life would stray from their marital vows, and Louis Nunn was one of those men. I think Steve Nunn was one of those men too.
Steve's story was that his father had died in bed with a woman, having sex, and Steve told that story with delight. Good old Daddy died in the saddle just the way he would have wanted to go.
And on this racetrack, Steve manages to match his dad, and then some.
When Stevie was around, there'd be 3 or 4 women. He was a taxidermist. He'd mount anything.
People just said, well, yeah, that's Steve being Steve, or in some ways they may have said, well, it's Steve being Louis.
He was going with women that were too young, and God knows what else.
Here's what else. Sordid trysts at no-tell motels and cruising for cheap sex on sleazy websites like sugardaddy.com. He was called a womanizer. How did he get this reputation?
Steve, well, he earned it. He was empty. He loved nothing.
Medicated by nothing but his beloved Kentucky bourbon, Steve's problems are so outrageous and so indiscreet, they take a heavy professional toll.
For some reason, his political dreams and ambitions just seem to wither and die.
Longtime Republican State Representative Steve Nunn lost his seat to Democratic challenger
In 2006, Nunn loses his seat in the state legislature to a relative unknown. The pull of the Nunn name now overcome by the push of the Nunn reputation.
That must have hurt him, because it was a referendum on the way he was acting.
And now Steve's marriage, just like his bourbon, is on the rocks.
He says, Tracy, get away from me. I don't want to hurt you. He wanted me gone, and then I wanted gone.
But just as everyone is ready to write off Steve Nunn, a new woman enters his life. A woman whose love and family connections offer him a road back to the halls of power, and maybe one more chance to fulfill his father's expectations. But the ghost of Louis Nunn isn't through haunting his son. Eventually, Steve would become known in a way his father could have never imagined or desired. You think he snapped?
He did snap. Yeah, he did snap.
The Nunn legacy has taken a dismal turn. The governor's son has been possessed by his daddy's demons and failed to advance the political dynasty. But just as Steve's dreams of greatness seem to be in tatters, his life and his career are rejuvenated when a new woman named Amanda Ross enters his life. Amanda's mother, Diana, recalls a vivacious, joyful girl.
She loved to have a good time. She had no trouble being the center of attention at a party or event. She liked that.
She just walked into a room and owned it. She knew everybody, and if she didn't know you, you got to know her.
In the genteel world of Kentucky society, Amanda Ross isn't just a pretty face.
She was a natural politician, I think.
She had the magic.
Yeah, she did. She really did.
Amanda wants to be a player, just like Steve Nunn.
She really wanted that career in politics, and I think that's what drew her to Steve.
Despite their 27-year age difference, on paper, Steve and Amanda make some sense as a couple. She is also the child of a powerful, politically connected, and recently deceased father, the public financier, Terrell Ross. They begin dating in 2007. For Steve, the upside is obvious. He was low. He kind of bottomed out.
Mm-hmm.
Now he meets this, literally, the vessel of youth. She's younger, she's vital, she's got potential, she's got backing, she's political. Everything he needed.
Yes.
Within a few months, Steve moves into Amanda's Lexington apartment, and they are the talk of the town.
She went to the governor's ball with him, and she was really happy.
Things are on the upswing. The couple gets engaged on Amanda's 29th birthday in 2008. True to form, Steve Nunn's political fortunes are mirroring his personal life. He'd crossed party lines to endorse Democrat Steve Beshear for governor.
I'm just going to be for Steve Beshear because I know in my heart it's the right thing to do.
And been rewarded with a plum appointment overseeing social welfare programs, including those dealing with child and spousal abuse, his signature issue as a legislator.
He had a whole new future, and he was thrilled with his job.
He was the number 2 man there. He had finally come back to the point that he was relevant again.
Meanwhile, Amanda lands a job at the State Department of Insurance. She's positioning herself beautifully to launch her own political career. At least that's how it looks on the outside. But behind closed doors...
They were 2 people that should never have been together. Steve and Amanda both had substance abuse problems. I think when you take a couple and they get intoxicated, they get jealous, they're not themselves, and the relationship becomes volatile.
Friends like Penny Bentley remember Jerry Springer moments, like a dust-up at this local restaurant.
He called her a bitch, and she got up and dumped a glass of water in his lap and walked out.
What did he do?
I think he continued to stay there and have dinner and drinks.
Another time at a friend's lake house, similar antics, when Amanda suspects Steve is two-timing, and he won't let her look at his emails.
He wouldn't give her the password to his computer, so she threw the hard drive in the river.
Take two fiery personalities, add plenty of intoxicants, and 2 fingers of jealousy, and suddenly the love that was supposed to be Steve's last best chance ends up bringing out the worst in him.
She hit him, and he beat on her.
When she told me that he had hit her, she just was kind of very defeated and didn't understand it really.
Were friends telling her, this is no good for you? You have to stay away from him?
I did. I'm like, why are you with him? You're a beautiful young girl. You know, come on. Steve Nunn's not all that.
Steve's attorney, Warren Scoville, believes Amanda stayed for a reason.
She wanted to do him. She wanted to get a domestic violence petition against him and an order to ruin his life.
According to that controversial theory, Amanda was infuriated by Steve's abuse and plotting revenge. The trick? Using Steve's own bad behavior to bring him down.
She was a smart woman. She worked for the state. She knew a DV order against him would probably mean the loss of his job.
Amanda's friends say that is not true. But in any case, things come to a boil on the night of February 17, 2009, at the Lexington apartment. Like many lovers' squabbles, this one begins over something small: chicken wings.
He was in there watching TV, and she said something about she wanted to go out the next night and get some chicken wings. And he said, well, I'm not real sure. So they got into an argument about it. He got up to leave, and she ran downstairs and blocked the door. He pushed her and then hit her. She said she did hit him. She smacked him in the face and cut his face with her ring, because she did have a nice size ring. And then eventually, she let him leave.
Later that evening, Amanda calls Penny and other friends, telling them she's planning to file for an emergency protection order, or an EPO.
I said, now really think about that.
Why?
I said, because that'll be the end of your relationship.
Because?
Well, because she's got an emergency protective order, and when you have that, then he can't be around her. And he could lose his job, you know, he's political, it will come out.
And that is exactly what happens.
She filed for an emergency protection order after she claimed Nunn hit her.
The case becomes the lead story in Lexington. A judge rules Steve unquestionably hit Amanda and grants a restraining order requiring Steve to have no contact with her for a year.
I was told that when she walked out of the courtroom after the judge had issued the EPO, she raised her hand and said, I got him.
Do you believe that in any way that order was an attack on the man in her life, that she was trying to use it to hurt him?
No. She told me it was the only way she could get away from him.
It was out of fear?
Yes.
That same day, Steve Nunn tenders his resignation.
Bashir could not afford to have an avowed abuser as the number 2 man in the cabinet that oversaw child and spouse abuse. He couldn't have it. He might could have moved him to the Alcoholic Beverage Commission or something like that, but that didn't happen.
It was all over. The former Golden Boy is now nothing more than a public disgrace.
What he had achieved in coming back was now splattered in the road.
To top it off, the man is broke. The $650,000 his father had left him was frittered away feeding Steve's various appetites. But there remained one vice Steve Nunn felt he could afford, and he'd get it no matter what the cost: revenge.
She said he's gonna kill me. No, really. He's gonna kill me.
See what's next. Shame, despair, revenge. These become Steve Nunn's traveling companions as he drives ever deeper into the darkness.
He drank a lot. I think he was using drugs. He was getting call girls. That's a nice phrase for it. Just doing crazy stuff.
You think he snapped?
He did snap. Yeah, he did snap.
Despite the obvious explanations for his troubles, Steve decides to blame his ex-fiancée Amanda Ross for filing that emergency protection order against him, a move that he thinks cost him his job and reputation. His rage against her is boring a hole in his brain.
Because he couldn't let it go. To him, it was she ruined his life, and somebody had to pay. Somebody had to pay.
At age 56, Steve was supposed to be ruling Kentucky's capital from the governor's mansion. But now he can't even govern his own feverish mind.
And I think he obsessed thereafter. Obsessed probably to insanity.
Scorned and despised by the elites who once cheered him.
They turned on him very quickly. He couldn't get an appointment to even talk about the future.
The word pathetic comes into my mind. He was like a beaten dog that wanted someone to stroke him.
Steve reaches out to, of all people, his ex-wife, Tracy Damron.
He was very sick.
Were people around him worried about what he might do?
Yes. I was worried.
There is reason to worry. A revenge plot is already brewing. Turns out Steve likes taking nude pictures of his lovers, and his vast collection includes several he'd taken of Amanda. Those photos now became part of a dossier he labeled the Psycho Bitch File, which, according to Amanda's friend Penny Bentley, he intends to make public.
He was all giddy, like, hee, look what I've got, and I'm going to try to ruin her career with these. He was going to buy a billboard and put one of the naked pictures of her up on a billboard, or he was going to have flyers printed and put them on all the cars.
He's shown these to mutual friends in April, trying to ruin her reputation, and it really doesn't get the reaction that he wants. So, his first step to try to defame her and
get revenge
doesn't work. So now we go to step 2.
Step 2 was stalking, says Amanda's friend Alex Redfield.
She would come out of drugstores, he would be there. She would be in her family room, and he would be outside on her patio looking in her window.
I could certainly see the fear that she had, and she did everything she could to try to protect herself. She had a gun. She had been trained to carry a concealed weapon, and she went and practiced with that gun.
He's going to kill me. She said, no, really, he's going to kill me. I thought it was sort of an attention thing or something. I certainly did not think that he was going to kill her.
September 8th, 2009, the final countdown of Steve's unraveling begins. He has a rendezvous at this motel with 2 women he'd met on SugarDaddy.com. As his dates would later tell police, the date doesn't go well.
He was actually screaming at us, calling us bitches and whores. I mean,
at the hotel?
Yeah, I mean, just really weird.
September 9th, Amanda Ross runs into Steve at a Frankfurt Rite Aid. She freaks out and tells her boss her life is in danger. That same day, Steve also swings by the Capitol, the place where Louis Nunn once reigned supreme, where Steve Nunn once aspired to the same greatness, and where now he is no more than an outcast.
And he told me that he was treated like he had the plague.
People would see him coming down the hall, and they'd turn away from him.
September 10th. Things take a macabre twist when Steve pays a visit to this monument store and orders his own tombstone. In this handwritten note, he alarms the proprietor when he indicates his own date of death, September 11th, 2009, the next day.
He was already dead, and as far as he was concerned, his life was over.
Word of Steve's disturbing behavior reaches his friend, Jimmy Bewley. Concerned, Jimmy takes Steve out for dinner that night to try to calm him down.
And I told him, I said, why don't you just come home with me and stay a few days? He convinced me that he was okay.
After they took him to dinner, they assured me he's fine. And he sent me a text about 11 o'clock that night, and he just said, you know, I'm okay, you know, he's going on a trip or something like that.
Remember 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I finally got out of bed, I didn't sleep. I got up and I called his number. Didn't answer, I called it again, didn't answer.
Nobody knew it at the time, but at that moment, Steve was driving to Amanda Ross's apartment. He's borrowed a car and put duct tape over part of the license plate. He brought along the psycho bitch file containing those nude photos of Amanda. He's also taken a .38 caliber pistol, which had been presented to his father by the state police years ago.
In my church, we're told not to be angry with anyone, to love your enemy, to make up with people. Not everyone's like that.
September 11th. As Amanda leaves her apartment that morning for work, it happens. Windows are open?
Yes.
People hear anything?
Yes.
What'd they hear?
They heard Amanda screaming, help, no, gunfire, more screaming, help, no, more gunfire.
Amanda Ross is shot dead. Police arrive and find her pistol still in her purse. Just then, Amanda's mother, Diana, is walking her dog near her daughter's townhouse and stumbles upon the crime scene.
And they had tape all around the area close to her car, and her car was sitting there. Then I knew exactly what had happened. I just turned around and left and came home. But I didn't even ask what happened. I knew that he had killed her.
You were so sure?
I was. I just went to bed and thought, I'm gonna never get up again.
It was too much.
Definitely.
When you take that kind of news, you know your daughter had done everything she could. But it wasn't enough in this situation.
No.
Police have no eyewitnesses, but almost instantly, they have a suspect.
By this time, we had learned an identity of the victim and had ran her name and found out that she was a petitioner on a domestic violence order against Steve Nunn. So obviously, we need to find Steve Nunn and talk to him.
Now the manhunt is on for the politician turned killer.
It's just madness.
Would the state of Kentucky take revenge of its own?
We sought the death penalty because that's what we did.
Or would Steve Nunn die by his own hand at his father's grave?
Steve talked about death to me a lot. He wanted to die.
Stay with us. Steve Nunn is the prime suspect in the shocking murder of Amanda Ross, but he is nowhere to be found. Police start calling friends and family and eventually reach his ex-wife, Tracy Damron.
Can you just tell me what happened to Amanda? I mean...
What I can tell you was she was shot and killed in front of her apartment this morning.
Oh my God, oh my God. We can see the writing on the wall. It's just madness. But where I think he could have gone is where his dad and mom were buried.
Why?
That was his world. He would go to the cemetery a lot.
Steve heads to the cemetery and proceeds to slice his wrists at his father's grave. He's bleeding, crouched behind a tombstone, just as police arrive. How did they find him?
He had a gun in his hand, giving him loud verbal commands to drop the weapon. He turned the weapon to the side and fired a round.
There's no question in your mind he was looking to end it all.
I know that he was. I know that he was. Ever since his daddy died, Steve talked about death to me a lot. He wanted to die.
Police disagree. You don't think he was going to shoot himself?
No.
What do you think he was doing?
Trying to get attention.
He got it?
Absolutely.
I don't think he had the balls to kill himself in that cemetery. Steve Nunn would have never shot himself in the head. He thought he was too good looking.
In any case, the bullet hits the ground. Steve is apprehended and charged with the murder of Amanda Ross.
All right, sir, are you Stephen Roberts Nunn?
Yes, ma'am.
In court, he is barely recognizable from the carefree playboy of his past. It's the scandal of the century in Kentucky.
Police say Nunn ambushed his former fiancée.
With lurid details, high society characters.
She was shot several times.
And a heart-wrenching funeral procession. The grieving mother atop a horse-drawn carriage, bearing the casket of her slain daughter. If this is the revenge Steve Nunn wanted, he tells police he got it.
He used the word revenge. Yes. He gets worked up talking about everything that he's been through in regards to the domestic violence case and mentions revenge. And it was Amanda, and I just want revenge.
But Nunn never makes a full confession. And while police have his gun, the bullets recovered from Amanda's body are too damaged for a forensic expert to make a match.
He could sit down and go, well, this is similar, this is similar, this is similar, but he was missing one characteristic, and he was unable to say that it was the weapon.
It becomes a circumstantial case, though the circumstances are damning, beginning with gunshot residue inside Steve's getaway car.
We got gunshot residue off the steering wheel and the gear shift of the vehicle.
There's that tape over the license plate, the psycho bitch file, that weird custom gravestone, and a mountain of other evidence. Enough for District Attorney Ray Larson to feel more than confident.
He's guilty of murder. Simple. And then we prove there's a domestic violence order. Click, in comes the option of the death penalty.
The death penalty. It's an option because of that 1998 law co-sponsored by then Representative Steve Nunn.
This is going to touch a tremendous number of families throughout the Commonwealth.
Ironically, Nunn's greatest achievement as a legislator now puts him in the greatest jeopardy.
It was cold. It was a cold, cold crime.
The only chance we had was to plead extreme emotional disturbance.
But the only emotional disturbance in this case was Steve Nunn's bloodthirsty craving for revenge.
He was just extremely angry, and it grew in him, and it grew in him.
Scoville goes so far as to blame the victim for unwittingly causing her own murder by accusing Nunn of domestic violence.
I think Amanda wanted to get a protection order more as a get even with Steve than it was to protect herself. Before she got the order, I don't believe that Steve would ever have killed her.
Larson says that theory is as offensive as it is absurd.
He knew what he was doing, and he had to be held accountable. He lost his career because of what he did, and he blamed it on somebody else. He didn't accept the blame.
Faced with the prospect of a prolonged and ugly trial, Diana consents to an offer of a plea deal. Steve Nunn agrees to plead guilty in exchange for life in prison without parole.
Are you telling this court that you are in fact guilty?
Yes, ma'am.
He will have to wake up every morning and think about what he did to Amanda and her family and what he did to his family.
For Diana Ross, that is punishment enough. The cycle of revenge is broken.
I didn't want revenge against him. I thought that would not do anything but hurt us more.
But it wasn't enough in terms of how to make this situation right.
No, we felt like we needed to make changes for other people so it would benefit future victims of domestic violence.
Diana is a soft-spoken, gentle woman, not like the exuberant political force of nature that was her daughter, but there she is at the lectern, having pushed the state to create a new law that allows judges to order electronic monitoring for domestic abusers. What difference would that have made in your daughter's situation?
She would have never walked out the door that morning.
I love you all. I love the people of Kentucky. I love Kentucky.
Steve Nunn, who grew up in the governor's mansion, will spend the rest of his life in another state-owned residence, the Roederer Correctional Complex outside Louisville. From his cell, he still writes letters to ex-wife Tracy.
I'm sure sorry, honey, for all the grief I've caused you. I just can't believe all that's happened. Still, I just wish you peace and love and happiness. Love, Steve.
Today, his family's estate is an empty ruin, occupied only by memories of greatness long gone, and perhaps the troubled ghost of the dearly departed governor.
The first thing that anyone who knew the family thought was, thank God his father is dead. Louis would be so ashamed, so horrified.
In Kentucky, mid-March is a time of promise. The newborn offspring of Derby winners test their legs under watchful eyes, just as once all eyes fell upon a young man in the springtime of his life, when the sky was the limit for the son of a legend. And that is our program for tonight. I'm Chris Cuomo. For all of us at 2020 and ABC News, good night.